Abandoned structures hold the secrets of America's past. A besieged medical facility where heroes fought back.
We had people breaking into cars and buildings, gunfire. We had little inkling that it would turn into the disaster that changed lives forever.
A secretive religious community with a desire to entertain.
They didn't take any new converts, so as people died off, the membership gradually became smaller and smaller and smaller. That was as it was supposed to be.
And an imposing ghost town, which became an unlikely refuge.
These rural places, we don't really associate them as having a queer history, but they really do. They're just hidden or too taboo to discuss.
Scattered across the United States are abandoned structures. Forgotten ruins of the past, monuments to a bygone era. Each shines a light on the story of this land and its people. These are the secrets of hidden America. In the Big Easy, a building famed for healing saw incredible feats of bravery during one of America's darkest hours.
Coming back to this building is one part nostalgia, one part mourning, and a little bit of part PTSD. To deliver care in an environment that was dangerous and under-supported. Yeah, that's heroic.
In downtown New Orleans, an Art Deco monolith casts a ghostly shadow.
This building is huge. It's gotta be 20 stories high, but the windows are dark and it looks lifeless.
When I look at the inside of this building, the first thing I think is just zombie apocalypse. It's clearly an institutional building, and there are creepy sort of hints of medical stuff.
One of the rooms appears to be an autopsy room. It's a very Dr. Frankenstein vibe.
Once, this represented a maverick's dream.
The motto of this building was, where the unusual occurs and miracles happen.
But when New Orleans found itself under siege, it became a living nightmare.
I think that there's a fallacy that we all live under in that at a time of disaster, the government is there to rescue us, and that's just not the case.
Located just 3 blocks away from the Superdome, this is where Peter W. trained.
I know these corridors well. It's where I spent 20 years of my career. It's nostalgic and sad all rolled into one. Tremendously fond memories here. Friendships, patience.
This building is part of a long tradition. One that began just 2 decades after this city was founded in 1718.
That time, New Orleans was just sparsely populated, and it was a place full of malaria, infectious diseases, and they were in desperate need of health care.
A wealthy shipbuilder answers the people's calls, and he gives New Orleans the money it needs to build a hospital that would offer free care to people who needed it.
Over the following centuries, socialist healthcare became ingrained in the Big Easy's identity. But during the Great Depression, with money in short supply, city officials looked to turn their back on this practice.
Huey Long was the governor at the time, and he was absolutely outraged by the idea that people were going to start paying for health care. So he marched into a meeting, supposedly grabbed the microphone and just said, "We're going to make this happen."
A tax raise funded a new 1 million square foot, state-of-the-art, socialist medical facility. This is Charity Hospital.
This hospital was the jewel of New Orleans. It became so beloved by the local population that it was given the nickname Big Charity.
Yet soon it became renowned for far more than just free health care.
Was famously known as a place for superb training.
The building had viewing galleries where operations would be watched by students. It was important in training people not just from around the entire United States, but from around the world.
But no amount of training could prepare the staff for what would happen on August 29th, 2005.
New Orleans was hit by Hurricane Katrina. This was a Category 5 hurricane, an apocalyptic storm that wreaked havoc across the South. Winds as high as 175 miles per hour.
When Katrina struck, it's loud noises outside because of the wind. The windows of my own office on the 13th floor crashed in. It was nuts.
The hurricane dumps over 2 trillion gallons of rain on Louisiana alone. And 36 hours in, an event 4 miles north of Big Charity would bring the hospital to its knees.
The levees broke, and the water just cascaded down over the city. 80% was underwater.
In a matter of hours, downtown New Orleans was flooded by over 10 feet of water. Charity Hospital was plunged into darkness.
All the major generators for the hospital were in the basement, which were rendered useless. There were some backup generators that they had for only critical life-saving purposes, but anything else was just not available.
The rising water would threaten more than just the power.
Halfway down these steps, right here, was water. And that's what caused us to have concern, because we thought it was going to make its way to this first floor where the emergency department existed. So there was concern. That's why we had to move the patients. If you can imagine carrying patients' stretchers up this stairwell, you know, the manpower required to do that, to move patients up into a safer place.
With large windows to maximize natural light, a temporary emergency room was set up in the 2nd floor auditorium.
This is where it all went down. Within a matter of 4 hours, we quickly moved 40+ patients and all the equipment to provide care for them up here. Some of the things that we did in this room were just nothing short of miraculous.
After 3 days of working in cramped and crude conditions, the staff and patients thought their ordeal might be over when helicopters were seen evacuating people from nearby Tulane Hospital.
We were able to solicit military half-track to bring our sickest ICU patients literally across the street through 4 feet of water to the helicopters.
When they got there, these critically ill patients weren't evacuated quickly. Tulane pretty much had a list of who they needed to evacuate, and they stuck to it.
Sadly, we lost patients on that roof.
For the doctors and surviving patients still on the roof, the hope of escape quickly degenerated into a nightmare.
And at that point, The people looking after them hear gunshots all around, and they just say, this is not gonna work, and they actually take the people back to Charity.
Due to flooding and fears for their own safety, many of the staff and patients of Charity Hospital were still stranded inside the building 72 hours after Katrina decimated New Orleans. And help was not on its way.
We would hear spotty radio reports that our hospital had been evacuated. Can you imagine just how dispiriting it was that someone out there thinks that you've been rescued? So now there's no one coming for you.
The staff actually writes on sheets, puts banners out the window saying, we're still here and the spirit of charity lives on.
It was a distressing time. You have folks who have been in it 72 plus hours into 96 who had it. You were without a shower, toilets, adequate food, and then you throw on top of that somebody who's sleep deprived, hot, sweaty, distressed. It's a tough ask, a real tough ask.
Despite the desperation, no one could predict what would happen next.
One of our emergency department nurses was contacted by her father and said, I'm gonna get a boat and I'm gonna come get you. Motored his boat to the hospital door and said, I came to pick up my baby. And she says, you know, Daddy, I love you and I would love to go with you, but my duties to these patients, I can't leave.
The father doesn't take no for an answer. He thought, if my daughter won't leave her patients, I guess I'll just have to rescue them as well.
On September 2nd, over 100 hours after Katrina first struck, something entirely unexpected began. Rounded up by the nurse's father, a motley fleet of volunteers started a 9-hour evacuation of Charity Hospital.
I'm not proud of how long it took to evacuate people, but it would not have happened without the volunteers. It was an impossibility. When I locked the doors and walked down this ramp and closed the doors for this hospital, I had no earthly idea that that would be the last time those doors would be open for patient care at this site.
For 2 decades, Big Charity has stood silent. It has been replaced by a new hospital, just a stone's throw away.
The new hospital continued the idea of this charitable free healthcare, but they didn't take on the name. There was only one real charity hospital, and that stood right there in the center of New Orleans.
But now, another of New Orleans' institutions is bringing it back to life.
So I'm president of Tulane University, and we are a huge developer in the revitalization and redevelopment of the Charity Hospital.
Parts of the structure will be turned into commercial spaces and condos, but nearly half of it will stick to the building's tradition.
What we're doing is going to make this the flagship space for our School of Public Health. We talk about the digital revolution in Silicon Valley. We view this as the biomedical revolution, and that will be right here.
For a city still struggling with the aftermath of Katrina, there's hope that the spirit of Big Charity will live on.
Charity Hospital is bigger than its name, it's bigger than the structure, because it represents hope, and it represents the best of us.
On the coast of Lake Michigan lies a forgotten community that brought a strange new style to America's favorite pastime.
We're in Benton Harbor. Now, in the dead of winter, it's an extremely inhospitable place to be.
Just off the main road is a monument to a time almost forgotten.
You go down a long wooded pathway that leads to an open ravine where inside there are just derelict, broken down pieces of old buildings.
You get strange glimpses of half-forgotten structures, and you start to ask yourself, what is this place?
Among the dilapidated buildings snakes a rusting transport network.
Was this a train depot? Was there a train that ran through here? And if so, why did it wind through the woods in almost a directionless way?
This place, it's got kind of a magical feel to it. You know, I spent a lot of my childhood coming here, and I grew up knowing the people and the kindness that they treated people with.
But what happened to the community who built this place?
It's kind of a mystery to a lot of people. People don't understand the religious aspect of it and what it was.
Despite being a mystery to most of the world, locals like Debbie Boyersmith remember this place all too well.
I spent a lot of time here because my family were members from the inception in 1903 up until 2017. There was a member of my family as a member of the House of David.
These are the remnants of an amusement park run by a community known as the House of David.
The House of David was started by Mary and Benjamin Purnell. The Purnells believed that they were messengers from God sent to herald the coming of Judgment Day.
But one day a family tragedy put a halt to their preaching. Their daughter perished in an explosion in a fireworks factory in Ohio.
Strangely, the pair refused to go to the funeral, believing that the living should not associate with the dead. And it was due to these strange, unconventional beliefs they were run out of town.
The Purnells fled to Benton Harbor and started to build a community here, attracting followers with their unusual doctrine.
Their beliefs are very much following the beliefs of Jesus. Being a vegetarian, you don't cut your hair, you don't cut your beard, you treat people kindly, non-judgmental.
Because they believed that Judgment Day, Armageddon, was imminent, the followers of the House of David didn't see procreation as a responsible or necessary activity. Therefore, they argued that all forms of sexual activity were immoral.
Despite the House of David's disapproval of reproduction, soon they had almost 1,000 members. Many of those people initially came here to be entertained.
At one point, the House of David was known by everybody in the area, and that's thanks largely to this place, Eden Springs Park.
More and more people came. And so they purchased this property here, bought the trains, and decided, let's entertain them. And it was a way to earn money to support the colony.
Eden Springs Park opened in 1908, and it had a lot of great attractions for the day. It had a fish pond, a giant dollhouse, and an auditorium where Benjamin Purnell put on biblical plays.
At Eden Springs, there was even a small zoo. It must have been quite an exciting place to visit.
Despite the community's private nature, they were extremely welcoming at Eden Springs Park.
It was the place to come back in the day. Well, of course, I loved riding the train in, because that was just always fun. My aunt, she would always meet us at the depot with tickets and ice cream. I remember the strawberry ice cream had pieces of strawberry in it, and to a kid, that was the best.
But not all of Eden Springs visitors behaved themselves.
And they actually started selling beer in the beer garden was after Prohibition. And occasionally people would have a little bit too much to drink when they were down there. So you see the building, the part on the right with the bars on the windows, that was called the drunk tank. So they had the authority to detain somebody if they got out of hand.
This park made the House of David well known in Benton Harbor, but a very different form of entertainment would make them famous across the nation.
One of the big draws of Eden Springs, or the House of David, was the baseball field. And right here was where the big stadium was.
It wasn't long before Benjamin Purnell realized that because of the group's emphasis on celibacy, many of the young men in the commune were looking for places to put their energy and their efforts. So in 1914, he started a semi-professional baseball team.
The House of David players looked like no other baseball team in America.
My grandfather, Earl Boyer Smith, he joined the baseball team. His hair reached down about this far.
The team soon became known for their unusual appearances. The men of the commune were not allowed to cut their hair or shave their faces.
At a time when sports stars were usually very clean-cut, well-shaven, the long hair and straggly beards of the House of David's team really made something of an impact.
Although they were very successful in the minor leagues, that was not enough for some members of the team.
If you've ever seen the Harlem Globetrotters play with the basketball and they kind of do magic with it, the House of David had a pepper game that they called it, and there were 3 of them, and they did that with a baseball, and they'd throw it up, and then it would be behind their back, and then it would be under their leg.
The House of David's baseball team became so well known, they started to attract some famous faces.
The team also played with some of the greatest baseball players of the age. Even the all-time most famous slugger of them all, Babe Ruth, put on a fake beard so he could play with the House of David team.
But despite the ball team's success, legal trouble put the future of Eden Springs Park at risk.
In the 1920s, the House of David became embroiled in a scandal from which it never really recovered.
Some members of the commune accused Benjamin Purnell of being a child molester and operating a fraudulent enterprise under the guise of religion. Benjamin Purnell was found guilty of fraud. He died the very next month.
After these revelations, the community split and its membership dwindled.
There have been some pretty far-fetched rumors that have been swirling around the commune. One such rumor is that there's a whole series of tunnels under the House of David buildings. Another one is that Benjamin Purnell is lying in state, so to speak, in a glass coffin in one of the rooms.
There are so many myths. People would make stuff up and say things happened that really didn't, or, oh, I thought that was just a men thing, that there were only men there.
By the 1970s, there were only a handful of members of the House of David left.
They just got to a point where they said, that was it. You know, we can't do this anymore. When they did actually close the doors, it was sad to see the life go out of it.
Unable to keep up with the park's maintenance, the House of David closed Eden Springs in 1973. Half a century later, a group of locals have come together to breathe new life into the park.
My family helped build it the first time. I can help, restore it. When the current owner bought the park in 2009, it was just almost like going to Machu Picchu and uncovering, what you knew was there somewhere.
A group of volunteers have been restoring the gardens, they've repaired the fountain, and even patched up some of the rides. And in fact, the trains have become a popular local attraction again.
The baseball diamond has been cleaned up and restored, and it even hosts kind of recreation vintage baseball games in honor of the House of David team.
It was the place to come back in the day, and I think a lot of people missed it. It's good to see them coming back, and it's good to see it come alive again.
In the hottest place on Earth lies one of the most spectacular examples of America's attempts to conquer the desert.
This is basically America's Rome. I get up and I look at this every morning, and this wonderful place, and I'm free.
This is on the edge of Death Valley, Nevada. Now, it's called Death Valley for a reason. Temperatures here can get up to 130 degrees.
At first glance, this looks like an empty wilderness, a barren, hilly landscape.
But closer inspection reveals signs of life.
These buildings were obviously made to last. Somebody must have felt that this place was worth investing in.
It wasn't the Wild West anymore. People came here to make money.
This is rather symbolic of early industrial America. It came in, it was noisy and wildly successful for a time before being left to crumble.
But from the ruins, future settlers would take sanctuary.
I think the story is really important because it's still very much ignored. They're just hidden or considered too taboo to discuss.
Carl Olson keeps watch over this place as its only resident.
People that came rushing in here, they came down here in wheelbarrows, they came down in wagons, they came in barrels and automobiles. It was really booming. People thought this was going to be the next capital of Nevada.
This is the Bullfrog mountain range, and its story began with a single prospecting hermit.
Frank Shorty Harris was a notorious prospector in the Death Valley region, and he made a living, or eked out a living, through prospecting.
In the summer of 1904, Shorty was out on one of his prospecting expeditions, and something caught his attention in the ground beneath his feet.
He broke off a chunk and found it filled with gold. The ore was assayed to have a value of $700 a ton, which is $23,000 a ton in today's money.
Yet Shorty didn't seem to care about his fortune.
It's said that Shorty got drunk, sold his claim for $500 and a mule, and then just went back to his nomadic desert ways.
But this was not the end for gold mining in the area.
There's a gold rush in 1904 in Bullfrog, and that just opens up several mines and brings in all of the stuff that you would expect to support the mining industry.
Many settlements began to spring up, and one of those was this town, Rhyolite. And at the center was the Cook Bank.
The interior of the bank was unreal. This was going to be like the statement of the town. There were marble on the floors, there were marble on the counters. You can see the vault in there where they kept the deposits. The building next to the bank, there was an ice cream parlor in there. They sold clothing in there.
The profits that were being made here attracted the attention of Charles M. Schwab, one of the nation's most prolific investors.
He was also a bit of a gambler, and in 1906 he decided to bet big on Rhyolite.
Schwab's investment in the local mines caused the town to explode.
So this whole area around here, there were approximately between 8,000 to 10,000 people.
And all these people needed somewhere to live.
Now, there's very little wood around as a building material, and there have been disasters with fires in boomtowns in the past. So people had enough confidence in Rhyolite that they just started building out of stone, building these sturdy, massive structures.
They had swimming pools, they had restaurants. The menus were unreal. I mean, stuff you'd never think about. Oysters, I mean, it was unbelievable how modern this town was.
Rhyolite almost resembled a 21st century town, even having its own train station.
This area, as it rose in elevation, this was called Nob Hill, and that's where the elite lived. The buildings were really quite striking with verandas around them, but once again, it was wood and it's all gone.
Within 3 short years, the gold was running out, and in 1911, the mines were shut down. But 7 decades later, a very different group of pioneers decided to try and make this a place to call home.
It's never been easy to be gay in America, and during the 1980s, it would have been all the more difficult. And during the 80s, we have the AIDS crisis, and it generates a moral panic.
Artist Emily Budd feels a personal connection with this town.
At the height of the AIDS pandemic, I was still pretty much a child, but it was definitely still present in the 90s during my whole coming out story. I remember the hysteria, the ignorance, the bigotry involved in how society treated queer people.
2 men intended to bring Rhyolite back from the dead.
The plan was to build a paradise for gay men in the wilderness where they would be free from persecution and abuse. They would name it Stonewall Park after the famous Stonewall Bar and riots in New York City.
The founders of Stonewall Park were Fred Schoonmaker and his partner Alfred Parkinson. They were a couple, they were very deeply in love. They had been together for like at least 13 years, and they were tired of being closeted.
The 2 Freds chose this ghost town as the perfect refuge.
So why choose this ghost town as a site? Legally, it was still an incorporated city, which meant that they could make their own laws decriminalizing homosexuality.
The aim was for pioneers to live in a utopian community.
So when Fred and Alfred came to Rhyolite, they actually stayed in this caboose right here. It's left over from when Rhyolite was a mining town. There's no water or electricity here.
It seemed that wherever the couple moved to, suffering followed.
From the very day they got here, they had suffered a lot of protests and abuse. People from the town of Beatty, which is about 6 miles up the street, would come here and shoot at their windows with BB guns. There were threats that the KKK would show up because they were a white man and a black man. It was definitely homophobic as well as racist.
Unfortunately, the dream of a place where people could be themselves in peace never came to be.
After a hateful campaign of fear-mongering, the 2 Freds decided that this was never going to work next to these locals, and they decided to look elsewhere in Nevada. Fred Schoonmaker died of an AIDS-related heart attack at the age of 44 in 1987.
The dream for equality lives on, but Rhyolite is now deadly quiet. Today, most of the remaining buildings of Rhyolite exist as a tourist curiosity, but Emily Budd has ensured that the 2 Freds story is not forgotten.
I wanted to memorialize Stonewall Park. I thought it was really important to have some sort of marker to the dream. So I built a memorial meant to be temporary. It's fading as the ghost town is before us. It has a very small marker that's buried with it so that in the future, it will tell anyone that finds it, like it's an artifact that there was a queer dream here. In these rural places, we don't really associate them as being queer or having a queer history, but they really do.
In a city on the Massachusetts coast lies an enigmatic building filled with stories of America's entertainment past.
Today, a lot of New Bedford's glory has faded somewhat. As you come to the south side, the first thing you see is an enormous highway that's obliterated a lot of the neighborhood.
People drive up and down this highway all the time, and when they do, they must think, what is this building? What used to happen here?
It's a mystery, you know, it was like, what's inside there? So when they closed it up, it just became a time capsule to another period. This would have been a really grand entry. Unfortunately, now it's bricked in with this rusty old door.
Inside, the building slowly reveals its secrets.
It's hard to tell what this place must have been because of the amount of stuff that's just laying around everywhere.
Underneath the grime and debris, you can still see that this was a very grand place in its day. You've got beautiful mosaic floors, grand staircase, elaborately painted walls.
When I came in this room, it brought back a lot of good memories as being a kid. I had my wedding here, you know, we had dances, everything. So good memories, but times change.
This strange building owes its existence to the rise and fall of one of America's most destructive industries. In industrial New Bedford lies a mystifying building containing a network of corridors and rooms.
It's clear that the auditorium was meant to be the star of the show.
Charles Hawk was struck by the faded beauty of this building and is part of a consortium who are attempting to preserve it.
I do historical restoration work and then just saw this as a challenge. There were 24 theaters in the city. This was the second biggest, but they're all gone.
This is the New Bedford Orpheum Theater. But thanks to this town's unique maritime past, this place was built with entertainment as an afterthought.
New Bedford was the heart of the whaling industry and produced a lot of whale oil. And because of that, it was known as the city that lit the world.
Whale oil was so valuable that whale oil captains became rich, and New Bedford became, for a time, arguably the wealthiest city in the world.
The riches afforded by whaling attracted immigrants from all over the globe.
It was probably most ethnically diverse neighborhood in the country. There was Portuguese, there was Spanish, Cape Verdean, French.
It was members of this French-Canadian community who constructed this building.
This was the target area for the French Sharpshooters Club. They would come up here, practice their shooting skills. They had the moving targets, sort of like what you'd see at an amusement park. There's an elephant and like a lion and a horse.
Originally, this was the clubhouse of the French Sharpshooters Club of New Bedford. But to generate income, they included a theater in the design.
They leased the theater out to the Orpheum Amusement Company of Boston. And it was a great place in the city for people to be seen, wear their best.
On April 15th, 1912, the Orpheum opened and was an instant hit.
In the early part of the 20th century, the major form of American entertainment was vaudeville. These are variety acts, people doing magic, singing songs. Some of the most popular vaudeville acts of the day included the magician Harry Houdini and the slapstick comedy trio, the Marx Brothers.
After the age of vaudeville ended, the Orpheum began showing movies, newsreels, and live music. It would stay popular with locals for decades, including Victor Fonseca.
I want to go back in that era. And we couldn't wait for the weekend because it was exciting. All good bands going to be playing at the Orpheum. And Friday was payday, so we go buy our new shirt, new pants, get our shoes polished, you know, get a haircut.
But by the 1960s, a new construction project meant the writing was on the wall for the Orpheum.
Over 2,000 buildings were torn down to put the highway in, so which was probably through the city's most historical, oldest buildings were here.
Oh, we all felt sad. We had a romantic downtown. When they knocked that down, people was crying.
The Orpheum Theater was spared, Yet its doors remained shut to the local community. In the years since, it has been used for storage, but the theater has been linked to the most troubled period in New Bedford's history.
Did you hear a story of one of our members? He walked into a Black Panthers meeting, and they were like, "What are you doing here?" And he's, "What are you doing here?"
The late 60s and early 70s were a time of enormous frustration and often violence in America's cities. Riots tore through Los Angeles, Newark, Detroit.
People remember riots in big cities, but in the late 1960s and early 1970s, even small towns were not spared.
The events in New Bedford were just as dramatic as in bigger cities.
In 1970, after the police made what many thought was a dubious arrest, conflicts broke out between police and people in the Black community.
It was a riot, and they would go downtown, destroy stores and fires and all that. It was scary.
Fortunately, the Orpheum was spared any damage, but much of the city was burned.
As the violence escalated, a group of Black Panthers set up what they called a headquarters in a burned-out storefront. When these men and women were put on trial, they would become known as the New Bedford 21.
The New Bedford 21 were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, anarchy, and inciting riots.
Most charges against the New Bedford 21 were dropped as the riots came to an end on July 31st, 1970. The town of New Bedford has recovered since then, but the Orpheum Theater has not. For over 50 years, the Orpheum has sat silent and empty.
This building was a portal for its community, delivering newsreels, transporting people to all over the world. It was quite literally the way in which that the New Bedford community connected with the wider world around them.
But now, a local campaign hopes to bring the theater back to life.
I mean, it's an important part of the history of the city at a time when the city was really doing well.
Like, it's just heartbreaking to see how it just like deteriorate. To try to bring it back like how it used to be. Oh, I would love to. We all do.